Hi, it's Sandra from SandraD Imagery, and I'm going to share with you a quick edit. And why I call it a quick edit was that I felt like being creative. I didn't want to go to too much trouble. I just wanted to create something and play. I find doing that is really good for me because it just allows my imagination to roam, create something, and come up with a piece of art that I like. It's not about always creating a masterpiece. I started with this background generated with AI, and I loved the result of it. I love the colours, the painterly feel, the moodiness, and I love the trees and the way that the forest just recedes into the background. But I wasn't too happy with the flowers that were in the foreground. I felt that one, they were a distractor, and because they're white, they can actually make the viewer look at them first, and that's maybe not where I want them to look. So what I'm going to do is now think, what am I going to put in here? Do I want to add an animal? Do I want to put a person? Do I want to put a little house? So I go into what I call my stash, and that's where I've got all my elements, backgrounds, things like birds, animals, little houses, cars. I've got a whole stack of different things in that stash. One of the things that I do when I'm not feeling creative, but I still would like to be creative in another way, is that I'll cut out elements ready for when I'm wanting to create a composite or a piece of art. And so I'll go into my photos or my AI generated images and think, well, what can I cut out? And when I turn this layer on, this was in the stash, this little girl. I love the way that she sits into the path between the trees and the play of light on her hair and her dress. Now, to get her to colour match or tonally match the background, what I use is neural filters, harmonization, and I let Photoshop do a lot of the grunt work where I can. So I'm just going to click on that layer, and you'll actually see down here is what I call a smart filter, and you can see it's neural filters. Now to access that, you'll just go to filter, then you'll go to neural filters, and then what you will do is choose harmonization and select the layer. But I won't do that at the moment because it won't work on the layer that I've got. But that's how I get it to color match. If I turn that smart filter off, you can see that's what she looked like. And by using the neural filter, it tonally matched the colors of the background. I'll turn that layer off and on. What a difference. This is a time now I sit back and look and think, what am I going to put in this image? Do I want animals? Do I want to add a rabbit? Do I want to add clouds? I let the imagination just roam. Doesn't have to make sense. It's just about playing and being creative. So I went to the stash and thought, well, okay, let's have a look. I'm going to look at what different birds I've got, and I decided to put 2 birds in. I'll click this layer on, and there's the little bird just there sitting in the branch looking down. And I chose the bird for a reason, because I felt the colours matched with the background. If I'd put a black crow in, for example, I thought it would be too dominant or get lost into the image. Then I decided to use another bird, and I just placed that bird up a little bit higher. And it's what I call the compositional triangle. If I start here at the little girl, that's the base of the triangle or the pointy end. By then adding a bird up here, I am giving it an angle. And then if you come across here to the other bird, again, there's another angle for the viewer to look, and then you drift down to the girl. Now, It's what I call that triangle, and it's just there that points everything down to the girl. It's just a subtle little gem to get the viewer to look around your art or your image. I'm happy with that. Now what am I going to do? And I think it's all about color grading. I need to add some atmosphere, light, or sculpt the light, maybe do a little bit of tonal adjustment. So the next layer that I did was what I call a stamp visible layer, Control Alt Shift E or Command Alt Shift E if you're on a Mac. The reason that I've done that is that I wanted to use the Nik software, and for me to use one of the filters in Nik, I have to have what I call a pixelated layer, layer 7. The next layer is where I go in and use Nik, and I chose Vaesa. I always struggle on the pronunciation for that. I'll click onto this layer and turn it on, and you can see it's just a very subtle adjustment in the tones. And what I chose was remove color cast, so it got rid of that color cast and put a little bit of warmth in it. And I find I tend to use that quite often when I'm working with AI generated background and images. Just gives that tonal correction. I sit back now and look and think, is there anything else that I need to add? No, I'm happy with it. Now let me start sculpting the light. The next one is another layer, and this one is layer 8, but I'll turn that off. And this is where I decided I don't want those distractors in that foreground. Let me turn it off again. If you look at the image now, those white tulips or flowers in that foreground, I find are distracting, and they make the viewer look at them straight away, not right into the image. And that is why I'll sit back and quite often look at the distractors or how the viewer's seeing the image. Turn that layer on, and what I did was use the remove tool. Now it's about sculpting light, and the next layer is horizon light, and it's an action that I've got in my personal stash, and it's using a gradient, and it just gives a light right through the middle band of the image. I'll turn it on, and you can see now it's just lifted light right into the middle of the image. And it's actually, as I said, a gradient, and I was finding I was using that in a lot of images. So to save time, I've created an action. You could do the same thing by selecting an area and using a levels, a curves, or you could use a little bit of dodging just in that middle area. So I wanted that illusion of just light fading in right into that background. I'm happy with that now. The next layer is just a stamp visible layer. I did it for a reason, because the next layer is where I've used a technique called reattaching the highlights. And again, I've set that up as an action for my personal stash of actions, and it just adjusts the highlights. Now, you'll see here on the mask, you can see some of the areas that it's selected. What will happen is that when you're doing different adjustment layers or different color grading techniques, it can flatten your highlights and they look a bit dull. And so by turning this layer on, you'll see that it's just popped the highlights a little bit. I'll turn that layer off and on. There's many ways that you can do things in Photoshop. You could go into curves, you could actually go into camera raw and open up your highlights, but I choose to use this action in my personal workflow, and it works for what I want to do. Now the next layer I've left in for a reason. I put in a blank layer, and if I turn it on, nothing happens. And the reason that I've left it in is because at this stage I thought I might do some brushwork I might put in a cloud, or I might brush in some mist or fog, but I wasn't sure. But in the end, I decided not to. I didn't want to because it was distracting from this image. My next layer is where I did some dodge brushwork, and it's what I call sculpting the light. I'll turn the layer on and you can actually see as I turn it on and off, there's just little pockets of light. And that's what I wanted to do. It's what I call a dab technique. But this layer is actually a grey layer. And whenever I'm doing dodging or burning, I always do it on a grey layer. And the reason is that I'm not dodging and burning on a pixel layer, which is destructive. What I'm doing with the grey layer is non-destructive. And the benefit of that is that if you don't like that dodging or burning, you can easily delete this grey layer. How do you get the grey layer? Is by going up to Layer, then you'll choose New, then you'll choose Layer. Then you come down to Mode and choose Soft Light. That allows you then to check this box, fill with soft light neutral colour, 50% grey, and click on OK. Once you click on OK, that's when you get that grey layer. I'll just click on Cancel. Now what I do to brush in or dodge is I get a brush, and I'll click on the brush, and I might adjust my opacity up here. If I don't want it to be too strong, I might even dial it right down to 4%. And because I'm clicked on that grey layer, let's just put in some light just here. I'll go up to a little bit more stronger so you can actually see. And there you go. By adjusting the opacity on a normal brush, you can start to sculpt light, but it's the grey layer that works. Just undo that. Next layer is a stamp visible layer, nothing happening. But the reason that I did that is I wanted to finish this image with a nick filter and its film grain. I'll turn that layer on and let's zoom right in and come and have a look at, turn it off. It's put fine film grain, and that film grain is in nick color effects. You could add noise to the image if that suits you, or if you don't have the nick software. What I find when I'm working with AI generated images, I usually put a finishing touch at the end of grain. It just fills in the pixels and it just gives it a little bit more of depth. It's personal choice. I hope you enjoyed watching this, what I call quick edit. And as I mentioned before, it was about having fun, being creative, not creating a masterpiece, but just enjoyment for being creative. If you like the forest background, I have a number of these in my imagination shop that are now available for you to create your own art projects. Have fun being creative, and thanks for joining in.